I work the night shift at a well-known supermarket chain in northeast Oklahoma. This particular night, around last Saturday, was particularly strange. I say particularly, as I think weird shit happens all the time so late at night, but it can usually be written off as some delusion fueled by sleep deprivation and seclusion. But this was just a little bit too strange. I thought I ought to keep a record of it. Only a small handful of us worked that late, around 5 in the morning. All the side stores we host are closed, as well as our deli and bakery, so it is just Jennifer running one of the lines, James, my manager, running inventory, Raph sweeping/mopping, and me stocking, and otherwise putting things where they go. Insane the number of people who place items randomly around the store, having decided sometimes only 2 aisles over they don't want it anymore. But I digress. So I'm running around, as I haven't even begun restocking the produce, supposed to be off around 7 when the morning crew starts showing up. I arrived at midnight, and since about 1, I haven't seen much of anyone, save for the occasional pass by Raph, as I ran to take the socks away from cosmetics into the clothing section. But then I noticed that I hadn't seen anyone at all since 3. Thinking, hoping, my mind was playing tricks on me, I went up front to chat with Jennifer, but there was no one at any of the registers, except just one customer, who I approached. I went through a neighboring line as to not scare the customer by slipping by them. I suppose they were just about as on edge as I was, as they probably haven't seen anyone their entire shopping trip. Granted, by the contents of their carts, it was a pretty short trip, just a few chips and things that can be found toward the front of the store anyway. They stayed waiting as I turned the corner and entered the cramped space behind the register. I have worked there for years, and used to work register until I discussed with my manager that I didn't want to work with people so closely all day every day. I said it more eloquently back then, and I gradually transitioned to stocking. A much quieter career for sure, but given the absence of Jennifer and the waiting customer, I thought I would take to my roots just this one time. In hindsight, to save me from the terror and despair I feel now, I wish I had just stayed to my stocking. I suppose I was still readjusting to the position. I felt my way across the dirty gray register, and the rugged conveyor belt, and the out-of-place pristine barcode reader. After what, from the customer's perspective, must have been a pretty uncomfortably long silence, I looked up with my greatest customer service smile and cheered, "Good morning." My enthusiasm was out of place, and out of character as well. I even caught myself off guard, even more so as I looked up at the heavily hooded, heavily jacketed customer, who let off only a small grunt as he stepped toward me. I began to grip the counter in fear so hard I could feel the blood circulate down my fingers. I had gone a little stiff, but could still feel that slightly less intensive smile stuck on my face. The customer took his hood down and just began looking at me with eyes that were, well, just white. White not only in the sclera and the iris, but over where the pupil was supposed to be, too. There was no redness around the edges, just white, and surrounding the eyes was a painfully pale but healthy-looking man with a scruffily well-trimmed beard. As he looked at me, I just turned and opened the register and took out the few bills that still remained inside and placed it on his open hand. Then he was gone. I looked around to a completely empty warehouse where tens of vials and a few registers used to be, with thousands of products all vanished around me. Just me in this mass of empty space. Good morning. Oh, it's just you, called a voice from behind me. I turned to see Jennifer approaching from the bathroom and looked down to find myself still in the checkout line, in front of the register. New jacket? She said. I looked down to find myself wearing the same heavy jacket as the man who had robbed me just minutes before. But I put on my proudest, most confident face and only mustered an affirmatory, "Yep." I decided to spare her the details, trying again to write it off as a momentary lapse of all mental function. I think that happens sometimes, especially considering I couldn't sleep the day before. It was a busy day. I'd always liked Jennifer. I don't know if I could call it a crush. Maybe it was just a lust thing. But I also valued her personality. She just had a great energy around her. Well, it suits you well, complimented Jennifer. You need something? No, I was just getting a second opinion on this jacket. I'm glad you like it. Of course, you should definitely get it. I gave a half-hearted smile and a hearty nod and turned to return to stalking. I looked at my watch to see it was 5:45, so I sped-walked/jogged to stock the produce, which was the last thing I had to do before I left at 7. It was a few minutes to 7 by the time I finished, and I headed to the break room to clock off as all the day people began to come in. Good morning, good morning, good morning, I said, as they all entered the room to clock in. I quickly clocked off to get out of everyone's way. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And I left. That was last Saturday. Today is Tuesday. And something just happened. I was getting ready for another midnight to 7 shift, and around 10, I was fixing my hair in the morning. My hair routine is just to get it wet and just to comb it over to the left, and shaving my stubble I have grown the last few days, when the image in the mirror began to shift. Subtle at first, but I picked it up when I noticed some items around my bathroom begin to disappear. My toothbrush, invisible through the mirror but still there, in reality. Then more obvious things, like the shower curtain, and the shower altogether. Then things began appearing in the mirror. A conveyor belt, a register, all things from my workplace there in the mirror as I stood in my bathroom. I looked at myself standing in front of the register as my image grew a beard, put on a jacket. I watched as my skin grew pale and my eyes grew terribly and completely white. I woke up on the road, in my car, on my 5-minute commute to work. The time was 11:40. I was going to be a little bit early, but that was typical of me. I would just chill in the break room, or if we were particularly busy, we rarely were, I would clock in a little early. But alas, this day, I just waited in the break room until midnight and clocked in and began walking around the store seeing what needed to be done. Having made a couple rounds, I was relieved to see it was going to be a pretty easy night and just relax for a bit as the late night customers left and it was down to the aforementioned 4 graveyard shift employees. Me, James, Jennifer, and Raph. I was admittedly still a bit shaken by the occurrence in my bathroom about an hour or two ago, but I had begun to believe that it didn't really happen, or that it was some dream, as you do, and I went to work. I was scouting the electronics when I saw a 10-inch cutting knife sitting on the counter. I looked around and saw absolutely no one around, so I grabbed it and began toward the cutlery to put it where it belongs when I passed by Raph riding a big motorized waxer. I gave him a small wave, and he did the same, as I felt my hands begin to tear the packaging of the knife. "What's up, man?" exclaimed Raph. He was a young employee, relatively new hire, fresh out of high school and working the graveyard shift to get up on his feet. His mother had recently passed, and his father was never really around, so he was living on his own now. I felt bad for him. He rarely talked about any of it, and managed to always be that high-energy teen that the rest of the store loved. That I used to love. But now I found it annoying. Terribly terrible. I never claimed to be a wordsmith. Just putting things back in their place. "Yeah, I got you," Raph said, leaning out for a parting fist bump, but coiling back as he saw what I had done with the knife, as I slid it deep into his throat. He looked calm, oddly, as if he had been longing for this moment for ages. I have no doubts he would have thanked me if he could, but he could only muster a few gargles and coughs as the blood began seeping from his mouth, and as the color drained from his skin, and his eyes rolled back into whiteness. Writing this down now terrifies me. It took a few moments to register exactly what I had done, and at that moment, I felt fear. But that was soon outshadowed by relief and some sense of duty, as if he had wanted me to do it, and I was merely doing him a favor. So I don't know if I feel remorse. I am conflicted by the knowledge that I should, and the feeling that I shouldn't, that I have done a good thing. The aisles around me sank to oblivion, and I was again in an empty warehouse tens of thousands of square feet in size, and taking the place of the lifeless Raph was the figure I met on my first day of this cathartic journey. He stood and stared at me for an eternity before I snapped back to the store just outside of the electronics section, alone. In front of me was the motorized waxer, with no one to drive it, and the body of Raph was nowhere to be seen. The time was 6:23, and I headed to the front knowing without evidence that my job was already done, when I saw Jennifer staring at her counter. "Hey, have you seen Raph? James was just out looking for him," she asked. "Not in hours. You?" I responded. I didn't know why I felt the need to ask her back if she had seen him. I already knew the answer, if not by the fact of what happened a few hours ago, then by her asking me in the first place. "Nope. I'm sure he's around here somewhere." I gave a smile and a comforting but shallow nod. I went home to collect my thoughts. That is where I am now, at home, collecting my thoughts. My mind is racing, and I cannot help but to be conflicted over all that has happened this last week. Everything is going around and coming back again and again and again. My doorbell rang, and as soon as I opened it, Jennifer quickly stepped inside. She had been crying. So much, there are no more tears for her to shed. Her speech was broken, but as clear as she could, she told me how Raph is not answering any of her phone calls or texts, that she paced the store, what must have been a dozen times, shouting his names, without receiving an answer, and how she found his waxer sitting outside the electronics section still running, and basically, she thinks he is missing. Yada yada yada. I tell her to calm down, but she won't give. Some force begins to constrict my heart as she looks at me quiveringly. "You don't seem worried," she said. I probably could have composed myself better, but at this moment I was overwhelmed with guilt and terror, and remorse, and all other things that I screamed, internally, I did it. I killed Raph. She looked at me still, unsure of the wild things happening in my mind. But in that moment she knew, perhaps by that smile on my face, that I couldn't control. That devilish smile that made itself from my heart into my face that I couldn't control, telling her that it was me. And she left in a hurry. I could not help but to laugh and laugh for what must have been hours, until the sound of a door slammed outside my house. Police. I opened the door before they even hit the doorbell. "Morning, officers," I said, still obviously in a good mood. 2 officers, and in the center was my manager, James. James was a person who looked heavily British, but claims to be from Maine. He was a pretty white guy, whiter than the average, with a short but even, kinda messy beard. "Afternoon, sir," they corrected. I looked at my phone. Wednesday, March 21st, 3. In all this excitement, time has flown nicely. I gave a little smirk and a slight exhale from my nose to lightheartedly acknowledge my mistake. "May we come in?" they added. "Sure." I gestured inside into the table. They sat right beside the door. I offered soda, tea, water, but they all passed, except James, who requested tea. "And you say you are British," I said jokingly. He chuckled, but only to be nice. I like to think it is a running joke between the two of us, but it is awfully one-sided. The officers stood uncomfortably. "Well, I don't have any tea, so I will get you water." He wasn't interested, so we all sat down. "Well, what's the occasion?" I asked after a short silence. "Just a chat," said one of the officers. "Raph and Jen are missing," James blurted out bluntly. I pretended to be surprised. And I kind of was, about Jennifer, considering I had just seen her earlier. But still, cue the surprise. The second officer butted in. "Believe you were the last to see them. Tell us about the last time you talked to each of them." "Well, Raph I last saw a few hours into my shift. As I was putting things away, he was waxing the floors. We only said hello, and I went on my way. Jennifer, I saw as I was clocking out. So I lied a little bit. I didn't have the energy to talk my way out of what actually happened. And I happen to know the store surveillance cameras haven't worked in months, so they wouldn't know any different. Don't lie to us. We could always have James run back the footage." Awfully direct and accusatory, so I held firm. "No, I swear on my life. I don't know what happened after work." "So you don't mind if we look around?" said the first officer. I wouldn't usually. I really had nothing to hide. Not in my house, except a few explicit magazines under my mattress. But for some reason, I decided to take up my natural right to the Fourth Amendment, or whichever it is, and stand my ground. "Not without a warrant," I said, more nervously than I intended, but I still felt strong. So they said, "Be back in an hour," James, why don't you stay here and keep him company? I agreed with that command. I have no problem with James. In fact, I'm sure he had more problem with him staying than I did. But so it goes. The officers left. James turned to me. You know, they have got nothing on you. I doubt they can get a warrant no matter which way they twist it. I knew. But just to hear another person say it caused a big sigh of relief. James got up. I brought my own tea. Would you like me to make you some? I never liked tea, but I nodded anyway. What kind of guy just brings tea with him? The British. I grinned. James knew what I was thinking and grinned too. I pulled out my laptop to update the story, as it has been so far, as I occasionally look over to see how James was doing in the kitchen. Now he is filling the pot, now he is heating it up. Blah blah blah. And as he reaches up into the cabinet and pulls down a knife, I'm curious as to what he plans to do with it. I don't make tea very often, not at all actually, but I don't think it requires cutting. And as he turns the corner completely to reveal his pale white face and his lifeless white eyes, I fully understand his intentions. The kitchen falls behind him into nothingness, and the living room to my left, and the windows to my right, and everything outside of it. With every increasing step this beautiful being takes toward me, the more and more everything around me sinks to nothingness, and the more and more I accept that this is what is best for me. This is what I deserve, and I'm okay with that. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.